"You don't belong here," my brother sneered at dinner. So I laughed, bought the $5 million restaurant, fired him, and took back everything. My name is Ethan Cole. I'm 38 years old. My own family left me without a seat at their fancy dinner party, telling me I should probably go eat at McDonald's. Before I tell you how I ended up owning that restaurant, the company my brother worked for, and the very building they lived in, please let me know where you're viewing from in the comments section. It's important to know who you're talking to. All of this took place at the Summit in Chicago. If you're from around here, you'll recognize the name. It's one of those five-star establishments where politicians cut deals over steak and celebrities hide from the cameras in private rooms. Reservations must be made months, sometimes a year, in advance. So I was shocked when my brother Nathan called to invite me to dinner to celebrate his promotion to vice president. Nathan and his wife, Rebecca, had spent years keeping me at a distance. I was the awkward older brother, the blue-collar black sheep, the janitor. I didn't fit into their new, refined lifestyle. So, to be invited to the city's most exclusive restaurant? Something felt odd, but a small part of me hoped it was a peace offering. Perhaps they were finally ready to be a family again. I put on my nicest suit. It was old and somewhat worn at the elbows, but it was clean and the best I had. I drove my old pickup truck, the one with a constant layer of filth and a dent in the driver's side door, and handed over the keys to the valet, who looked at me as if I'd just arrived from another planet. I walked inside. The restaurant was dripping with crystal chandeliers, soft classical music, and servers who moved like ghosts. I noticed them across the room. Nathan looked great in a $1,000 suit, while Rebecca sparkled in a designer dress with diamonds. They sat at a large table with some important-looking folks, but as I came closer, a chill ran up my spine. There were 10 chairs around the table. 10 individuals sat in them. There were no unoccupied seats. I stood on the edge of their circle of laughter and clinking drinks. Nathan eventually looked up, a slow, smug smile creeping across his face. The entire table fell silent, observing me. Then, with a voice as sweet as poison, Rebecca leaned forward and said, "Loud enough for the tables around to hear. Oh, Ethan, I'm so sorry. There must have been a mix-up," she continued. "But you know, maybe McDonald's would be better suited for someone of your background." The hush in that section of the restaurant was deafening. Every eye was on me. They were waiting for me to shatter, yell, and flee in disgrace. Instead, I started laughing. It began quietly, a rumble in my chest, and gradually became louder and louder until it was a roar that rang throughout the establishment. It was not a mad person's chuckle. It was the laugh of a man with all the cards. Nathan's smile disappeared. Rebecca's face went pale. And then was when the real show started. To understand that night, you must first understand the previous 25 years. You need to understand Sarah. My life, the one I was intended to have, ended when I was 13. We were a typical family. Mom, Dad, me, Nathan 5, and Sarah, who had just turned 2. We were not wealthy, but we had plenty. We lived in a little house with a backyard and ate family dinners every night. Then came the phone call. A rainy night, a twisting road, and a drunk motorist crossing the center line. My parents' car was struck head-on. The accident made national news. It was horrifying. Just like that, I was no longer a child. I was an orphan and the guardian of 2 younger siblings. The world suddenly got incredibly chilly and harsh. The life insurance payout was barely enough to keep the house. I dropped out of school. My childhood was over. My new life was a flurry of juggling roles as a father, mother, and provider. I learned to cook, clean, change diapers, and assist with homework, but I didn't comprehend myself. Nathan was young enough to adjust. He was a child who only needed food and a cozy bed. Sarah was frail. She was a sweet, gentle girl with large, inquisitive eyes. When she was 4, she became ill. It started with a cough and eventually progressed to fever. The doctor diagnosed pneumonia, which is a serious condition. He stated that she needed to be admitted to a hospital, given particular antibiotics, and get round-the-clock care. I took her to the public hospital, the only one we could afford. The situation was chaotic. People were groaning on gurneys in the hallways. The odor of antiseptic and hopelessness hung in the air. We waited hours. Sarah's little body burned with heat as I held her in my arms. She was having difficulty breathing. I begged the nurses, receptionists, and anyone who would listen. They all gave me the same exhausted expression. "We'll get to you when we can. Everyone here is sick." While we waited, I noticed wealthy people entering through a different entrance. We were quickly led to private rooms with medics racing to their side. Their money got them a quick pass through the line of misery. We finally secured a bed in a congested ward. Unfortunately, it was too late. The sickness had spread far too quickly. I watched my little sister die in my arms. Her final breath was a little trembling gasp. The world went silent. I clutched her lifeless corpse amid the hospital's commotion. However, all I could hear was the thunderous failure of my own powerlessness. I'd failed her. Money, or the lack thereof, had killed her. That night, hugging her beloved worn-out teddy bear, I made a promise. It was a blood oath whispered into the darkness of our modest, peaceful home. I swore Nathan would never experience that type of pain. We would never deny him anything because we did not have enough. I would construct a huge wall of money around him so that no hardship could ever reach him. I would give up everything to give him the life that was taken from us. So I did. For the following 25 years, my life was not my own. It belonged to Nathan. I worked 3 different jobs at the same time. By day, I worked as a janitor, cleaning toilets and scrubbing floors in office buildings. The fragrance of bleach became my cologne. At dusk, I'd clock out and go to a construction site where I'd strain my back hauling drywall and mixing cement until my muscles ached. My nights were spent as a security guard, peering over deserted buildings. The only sound coming from me was turning pages. I used the long, quiet hours to study. I read all I could find about business, finance, and investment methods. For decades, I slept only around 3 hours per night. My hands developed permanent calluses, leaving a trail of scars and sores. Every dollar I earned, every bit that wasn't spent on bread and rent, went to Nathan. He attended the greatest private schools while I ate ramen noodles over a sink. He was on the football team. When he turned 16, I purchased his first car, not a beater like mine, but a brand new premium BMW. I wanted him to have what the other children had. I wanted him to feel proud rather than humiliated. I paid for him to attend a top business school. The tuition was enormous. I worked extra shifts and sold anything of value we had left from our parents. He never queried where the money came from. He simply accepted it. When he graduated, I paid the entire down payment on his penthouse apartment in a brand new high-rise. And when he met Rebecca, the daughter of a bank executive, I funded their lavish $250,000 wedding. I stood in the back in my ill-fitting rental suit, watching my brother marry into a world I'd created for him but could never be a part of. He was living my fantasy, which I had created for him on the grave of my own life. But this is the bit that no one knew. Here's the secret I've kept hidden for 15 years. Around the time Nathan started college, I began investing my small savings of few thousand that I had gathered together. I applied what I'd learned during those lonely evenings monitoring vacant warehouses. My first investments were small and risky, but my strategies, which were based on desperate reasoning, were successful. Then they paid off again. I had a talent for spotting patterns that others missed. I reinvested every cent. While I continued to clean toilets during the day, my secret portfolio grew. First $10,000, then $100,000, and finally $1 million. It became a silent but raging motor in the background of my life. I began purchasing businesses from a small catering company and a commercial cleaning firm. Then came greater things like real estate and internet firms. And 15 years ago, I purchased the Summit. I acquired the whole parent business that owned the restaurant, as well as a portfolio of other high-end hospitality facilities. It was now a part of my empire, which was worth more than $78 million as of the night of that dinner, but I never altered my life. I purposefully maintained my employment as a janitor, or at least the impression of it. I kept the older vehicles. I wore second-hand clothing. I resided in the same modest, inexpensive apartment. It became a test, a social experiment. I wanted to see who would respect me, Ethan Cole, the man, even though they felt I had nothing. Who would be kinder to the janitor? Who would look past the dirt beneath my fingernails? The answer was almost no one. Certainly not Nathan or Rebecca. As Nathan ascended the corporate ladder, which I had discreetly built and studied for him through anonymous strategic investments in his company, he and his wife began to gradually remove me from their life. The invitations to Thanksgiving ceased. They were constantly traveling. Christmas became a card that contained a gift certificate. When his bank colleagues came around, they'd make excuses. My brother's a very private person, they said. I was their dirty little secret. The Summits? Manager Robert was one of the few people who knew the truth. I met Robert years ago when he was a down-and-out night guard at another building I was watching. He had lost his job, his wife was ill, and he was sleeping in his car. I shared my dinner with him and gave him a few hundred to help him get back on his feet. And later, when I had the resources, I hired him. His loyalty was to me, Ethan Cole, the man who shared his sandwich, rather than the millionaire who signed his paychecks. He was the one person I could truly trust. The final straw occurred around 3 months before the tragic supper. The cleaning company I worked for was acquired by a larger corporation, and my position was abolished. For the first time in decades, I was officially unemployed. I decided to take one last test. I called Nathan. I used my most defeated voice. I told him I had lost my job and was a few hundred short on rent. I asked if I could borrow some money to get by for a while. The stillness on the other end of the telephone was chilling. Ethan, he continued, his voice taut with frustration. We can't. Things are tight right now. Tight. He was earning $800,000 per year. Maybe you should look into some government assistance programs, he said, his voice full of disdain. That night, Nathan and Rebecca gave me a gift. It was a stunning, expensive-looking desk clock. The note included the following message: thinking of you in this difficult time. Hope this brightens up your apartment. 'Twas an odd and impersonal gift. I thanked them, but a dark and ugly suspicion began to emerge in my mind. On a hunch, I brought it to an expert. A high-end voice-activated recording device was buried deep within the clock mechanism. They were not just thinking about me. Were spying on me. I placed the clock on my mantelpiece and set it to record. I spoke to myself about my position, about feeling lost and hopeless. I was performing for a 2-person crowd. A week later, Nathan called to extend an invitation to the Summit. We want to celebrate my promotion, Ethan, he added, his voice smooth with fake emotion, and we want you there. It's time to put the past behind us. I realized it was a deception. I realized it was a trap. But I agreed because I felt it was time to end the charade. I sat in my modest apartment, staring at the picture of Sarah I kept on my bedside. Her smile seemed quite innocent. She would never have experienced such planned cruelty. Almost there, little sister, I said softly to the photo. I'm about to cash in on the promise I made to you. and I promise you, they will never, ever forget. This night, the test was over. The findings were in, and judgment was approaching. The weeks leading up to the meal felt like the quiet before a hurricane. On the surface, everything seemed normal, but underneath, the pressure was increasing, and I was the one with my hand on the valve. My first call after accepting Nathan's invitation was to my actual desk, not the beat-up kitchen table in my apartment, but the one in my secure private office downtown, which Nathan had no idea existed. I buzzed Jessica, my public relations manager. She was bright, ruthless, and steadfastly loyal. "Jessica," I whispered, my voice raspy, "I'm attending a dinner in 3 weeks at the summit, my brother's party. I want a full media package ready to deploy on my Signal, audio files, financial statements, a complete narrative. I want it leaked to the most aggressive online news outlet you know. I want it to go viral." There was a pause. "Ethan, what's going on?" she questioned, her voice filled with alarm. "The test is over," I said. "It's time to collect the data." I didn't need to say anything more. She knew my tale. She simply said, "Consider it done." Next, I worked on the desk clock, which was an unattractive and expensive gift from Nathan and Rebecca. I had been cautious. I talked openly about my financial problems, loneliness, and failing health. I painted an image of a man on the verge of collapse. I wanted to see how far they'd go. The clock was delivered. I sat in my own office, headphones on, listening to the recordings it had made of their magnificent residence. The sound was very clear. I overheard them chatting about me. "He's becoming a liability," Nathan said, his voice tinged with irritation. "He called, asking for money again. What if one of my partners sees him? What if he shows up at the office?" Then Rebecca's voice was like ice. "We need to handle this, Nathan, for good. My father has been asking questions. He said, a man is judged by his family. We can't have a broke janitor dragging us down." My jaw constricted. I kept listening. "I've been looking into some places," Rebecca explained. "State-run facilities. There's one upstate. It's clean enough. We can get him declared mentally incompetent. We can get power of attorney. We can sell his sad little apartment and use the money for his care. It would be a mercy, really. He's clearly unstable." My blood ran cold. It wasn't simply neglect. It wasn't just shame. This was an outright plot. They were going to commit me, proclaim me insane, and confiscate the only thing I had in the world, my modest apartmental, to protect their social position. They were not simply deleting me from their life. They planned to lock me up and toss away the key. That was the moment any last familial feelings I had for them died. It wasn't about the shattered link anymore. It was about surviving. It was about justice. I saved the audio file. I emailed it to Jessica with one instruction. "Include this in the shipment. Title it The Mercy Plan." A few days later, I conducted the last test. I called Nathan again. "Nathan," I continued, my voice cracking slightly, "I'm sorry to bother you again. I'm really in a bad spot. Unemployment hasn't come through. I might get evicted." The sigh on his end was heavy, theatrical. "Ethan, I told you we can't help. Rebecca and I have commitments." "I know," I replied. "I just... I feel so lost sometimes. I feel like I'm losing my mind." I was feeding them exactly the phrases they wanted to hear. "You need to get help, Ethan," he added, his voice becoming serious. But this was the concern of a predator, not a brother. "Maybe talk to a professional. There are state services that can assist people in your situation." Assistance? That is what they called it. "Okay, Nathan," I replied softly. "I'll see you at dinner." "Yes," he answered, his voice warming. "It will be great. A real celebration." I hung up the telephone. I didn't feel angry anymore. That had burned out, leaving something cold and unyielding in its wake. The issue was resolved. I didn't spend my time agonizing about what to dress for dinner. I used it to make two final calls. The first was to Robert at the summit. "Robert," I told him, "tonight's the night. I'll be arriving at 7. Treat me as you always have when I've come in through the back, as a stranger, until I give you the signal." "What's the signal?" he inquired. "You'll know when you hear it," I assured him. "And have my private dining room ready, the one with the conference call capabilities. And Robert, tip off a few of the paparazzi. Tell them a big scandal involving a banking vice president is about to break at your restaurant." "Don't mention my name." "With pleasure, Mr. Cole," he responded, his voice full of satisfaction. My final call was to Mr. Whitaker, CEO of the parent investment group that controlled the bank where Nathan worked. Whitaker was an old-school executive I had retained when I purchased the company. He was a good man who respected ethics. Naturally, he was aware of my identity. He reported to me directly. "Martin," I said, "I need you to do me a personal favor. I need you to be at the summit tonight at 7:30. Have dinner at the bar. At some point, I'll be sending you a text. When you receive it, I need you to walk over to my brother's table and say exactly what the text says. Can you do that for me?" "Ethan, is everything all right?" he inquired. "Everything is about to be set right," I said. "Just be there, Martin." "I'll be there," he confirmed. No more questions were asked. The stage was set. The actors were in position. The script was written. I drove to my parents' graves and Sarah's modest one next to them. It was a cold and dismal afternoon. I did not bring flowers. I just stood there, my hands in my pockets, the wind blowing across my thin jacket. I was no longer the 13-year-old boy standing here bewildered and afraid. I wasn't the weak man who witnessed his sister's death. I'd completed the wall I promised, a fortress of wealth and power. And my brother, the guy I had constructed everything for, was on the opposite side, attempting to bring me down. He believed I was a liability. He was about to find out I was the bank, and the house always wins. I looked at Sarah's name etched into the cold stone. "Tonight," I said, "this is for you." The drive to the summit was unusually tranquil. The city lights flashed past the windows of my old pickup truck, and the engine rattled in a familiar cadence. For most people, a night like this would be fraught with dread. For me, it felt like returning home, not to the restaurant, but to a moment of complete clarity. The years of duplicity of living two lives were about to end. There was a peculiar calm in that. I pulled up to the valet. The young man with the pristine red jacket looked at my truck, then at me, with a mix of surprise and contempt. He presumably assumed I was making a delivery to the kitchen. "I have a reservation," I said quietly as I handed him the keys. "Under Cole," he smirked. "Right, just leave it here. I'll find a spot for it." He motioned vaguely to a corner of the lot, away from the gleaming line of Mercedes and Bentleys. When I walked through the heavy oak doors, the noise of the city faded away, replaced by the calm tones of affluence. I stood for a bit, allowing my eyes to adjust. Robert, the manager, was at the host stand. He noticed me, and for a brief moment his professional mask slipped. I noticed the recognition, the loyalty. Then, just as we had planned, it was gone. His expression became a courteous, neutral blank slate. He gave me a brief nod, as he would to any stranger, before looking aside to attend to another guest. It was perfect. My gaze swept the room until I found them Nathan's party. They were loud, confident, and the rulers of their own universe. Nathan was holding court, delivering a story with grand gestures. Rebecca was laughing, her head thrown back, and the diamonds around her neck caught the light. They resembled a magazine advertisement for success. I started walking across the restaurant. It felt like 100 miles. With each stride, I could feel the other diner's eyes on me. My suit was not tailored. My shoes were not made from Italian leather. My hair was not styled at a high-end salon. I was an outlier in their ideal world, a bug in the matrix. I could hear their unspoken judgment. He does not belong here. As I approached the table, I focused on Nathan's expression. I witnessed the moment he noticed me. His smile faltered for just a moment. A flicker of displeasure crossed his face, before he replaced it with that arrogant, condescending smile. He was really going to do it. He planned to humiliate me in front of his new prominent pals. I approached the table and stood there, waiting. This was his move. He let the stillness linger, savoring my misery. He allowed his friends, his possible clients, his entire world to stare at the poor, embarrassed brother. Then Rebecca delivered her line with surgical precision. Maybe McDonald's would be better suited for someone of your background. The subsequent silence was different. It wasn't only quiet, it was heavy, full of delight and vicarious shame. I looked around the table. I noticed pity in one woman's eyes. I found sadistic delight in a man's sneer. Nathan appeared to be triumphant. He believed he had won. He believed he had finally put me in my place, solidifying his position in this new society by sacrificing me on its altar. And at that point, all I could think about was Sarah. I imagined her small hand in mine, about the desperation of that hospital hallway. I had established an empire to avert this precise feeling of being worthless and disposable. And here was my own brother, the cause of it all, presenting me that feeling on a silver platter in front of the entire world. The agony was acute, like a knife twisting in my gut. For a single second, the 13-year-old boy, the damaged man, was present. He wanted to yell, he wanted to cry, he wanted to turn and run. But then another notion came through. They do not know. They had no idea who they were speaking to. They were disrespecting the man who owned the ground they were standing on. They planned to steal a little flat from the man who owned the entire complex. They were attempting to get a man labeled incompetent, who could purchase and sell their lives 100 times without realizing the transaction. The sheer monumental irony of the situation was overwhelming. The insanity was stunning. And that's when the laugh started. It wasn't a choice. It was a reflex that erupted from somewhere deep inside me. Pain, anger, and 25 years of sacrifice, all combined to produce a single explosive sound. It began with a chuckle, a deep rumbling that made my shoulders shake. The people at the table seemed perplexed. Then it increased. I flung back my head and laughed, a full-throated, real yell of delight. The sound broke through the restaurant's quiet hum like a thunderclap. Conversation ceased. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Everyone in the establishment turned to stare at the ragged man who was laughing like a king. I noticed Nathan's expression change. The smugness vanished, replaced by perplexity, then alarm. This was not the reaction he had planned. I was not supposed to laugh. I was supposed to crumble. I let the laughing subside, wiping a tear from my eye. I stared directly at Nathan, and for the first time that night, I smiled a genuine smile. "That's a good one, little brother," I replied, my voice steady and clear. "But I think I'll stay. In fact, I'm feeling like I need a bit more privacy." I looked away from their startled expressions. My gaze met Robert's across the room. I gave him the tiniest nod. It was time. Robert began to come toward me, not at the rushed speed of a manager dealing with a crisis, but with the leisurely, reverent stride of a servant approaching a monarch. Every stride he took crushed Nathan and Rebecca's world. He came to a halt a few feet away from me in the open area between my brother's table and the remainder of the dining room. Then he did something that caused a ripple of gasps around the room. He bowed. Not just a nod, but a deep, formal bow from the waist. "Mr. Cole," he replied, his voice ringing with a politeness that was completely out of character with my look. "I apologize for the wait. Your usual private dining room is ready, sir, whenever you are." Nathan's face lost its color. I could see the gears working in his head, the perplexity clashing with a scary, dawning understanding. Rebecca's neatly painted mouth dropped open. "Whoa, what? ... What is this?" Nathan asked, glancing from me to Robert and back again. "What did you call him?" I turned to face my brother, a smile never leaving my lips. He called me by my name, Nathan. "Mr. Cole. It's a name that carries a little more weight in this establishment." "Then you seem to think." I took a step toward the table. The other guests recoiled in their chairs as if my ragged outfit were contagious. "You see, Robert, I love what you've done with the place," I murmured, my voice echoing throughout the silent room. "The new lighting is a nice touch. The wine list is superb. I knew you were the right man for the job when I promoted you." Nathan's eyes widened. "You promoted him?" "Of course," I replied. "I own the place, the Summit. The entire hospitality group, actually, bought it about 15 years ago. It's been one of my most stable assets." A woman at the table made a faint, strangled sound. Rebecca looked like she'd seen a ghost. She was shaking her head in a short, jerky motion as if she could physically refute the events unfolding in front of her. "No," she whispered. "That's impossible. You're a janitor?" "I was," I said kindly. "Among other things, it was a good, honest job. It helped me pay for important things like Nathan's tuition at business school, and his BMW, and the down payment on your penthouse, and this wedding." I ticked each one off with my fingers. "That was a hell of a bill, by the way. It's the $250,000. One, Nathan appeared to be about to get sick. He was pale and sweating, his eyes darting around looking for an exit, but he was trapped in his own spotlight. "But that's not all," I said, loving it far more than I should have. "I'm a believer in diversified portfolios. Hospitality is great, but real estate is solid, which is why I also own the building you live in, all 50 floors of it." I halted. "You're not just my brother, Nathan. You're my tenant." My phone buzzed in my pocket at that time, indicating a text from Jessica. The package was live. I took out my phone and typed a message to Mr. Whitaker, who I could see sitting at the bar, nursing a scotch and observing the situation with a calm, neutral expression. "Martin, walk over. Say this: 'Nathan, we need to chat. Mr. Cole has shown me some unsettling information about your plan to seize his assets. Pack your workstation. You're finished.'" I pressed send. "And then there's finance," I added, putting my phone down and returning my attention to Nathan. "A tricky business, but it can be very profitable if you own the whole game. For instance, if you own the parent investment firm that owns the bank where a certain vice president thinks he's a big shot." As if on cue, Mr. Whitaker rose from the bar and began going toward our table. He was an imposing figure with silver hair in a suit that most likely cost more than my truck. So arrival transformed the scene from a devastating family drama into a business execution. He came to a halt beside Nathan without looking around the table. "Nathan," he began with a stern tone, "we need to talk. Mr. Cole has shown me some troubling information regarding your plot to seize his assets. Pack your desk, you're done." Nathan looked at him, his lips opening and shutting like a fish. The words did not appear to register. And then a new sound filled the room, a series of buzzes and beeps all around us. The phones of the other diners started to light up. I noticed a man's eyes widen as he read his screen. A woman gasped and raised her hand to her mouth, displaying her phone to her spouse. The story was out. Jessica's work was really efficient. The headline was probably something terrible: "Banking VP humiliates secret billionaire." brother and tries to get him committed. To complete the look, I took a small high-quality speaker from my jacket pocket. I'd been waiting for this. I connected it to my phone. "You know, Rebecca," I began, my voice becoming less raspy, "when you talked about those state-run facilities, about having me declared mentally incompetent, you called it a mercy. I was very moved by your concern for my well-being." I pressed play. Rebecca's own voice emerged from the speaker into the dead silence of the startled restaurant. Captured in perfect clarity by the desk clock she had given me. "We need to deal with this, Nathan, for good. If we can have him declared mentally incompetent, we can obtain power of attorney. We can sell his pathetic little place. It would be a relief." "Really?" Rebecca let out a choked shriek and recoiled as if she had been smacked. Nathan simply stared at the speaker, his face a mask of complete misery. The show was not over. As if summoned by the drama, the restaurant doors flew wide, letting in a flood of flashing lights. The paparazzi that Robert had alerted had arrived, just in time to capture the climax. They crowded closer, cameras clicking, catching the image of the humiliated, disgraced couple and the quiet, shabbily dressed man who had just destroyed them. Without saying a word, I glanced at Nathan and Rebecca. Their perfect world crumbling beneath their feet, the flashbulbs highlighting their humiliation. They had intended to make me invisible. Instead, I had turned them into the focus of the world's attention for all the wrong reasons. I turned to see Robert, who was standing by, grimly satisfied. "Robert," I asked, "please escort my former tenants out and send a cleaning crew to their penthouse. I need it empty by morning. I will be renovating." I then looked at Mr. Whitaker. "Martin, thank you for coming." He simply nodded. "The board will be notified in the morning. There will be a clean break." I stood there for a minute, in the center of the storm I had made. The ruckus, the shouting reporters, the horrified expressions, none of it moved me. I felt quiet. I'd done it. The promise was kept. I turned and headed toward my private dining room, which had been waiting for me all along, leaving the devastation of my brother's life behind. The fallout was spectacular. It wasn't just a scandal. It was a global media event. Jessica had done her job brilliantly. The report, replete with audio from the Mercy Plan, was everywhere. It appeared on every major news channel, blog, and social media feed. The hashtag billionaire janitor was trending internationally. Celebrities and politicians I'd never met were tweeting their criticism of Nathan and Rebecca. They had become the poster children for avarice and ingratitude. I faced immediate and brutal retribution. The next morning, Nathan went to his office to pack his desk, as Mr. Whitaker had requested. He was welcomed by security in the foyer and given a cardboard box containing his personal belongings. He was fired immediately for serious misconduct and activities that created significant reputational damage to the company. His career in finance ended. No credible firm would ever contact him again. Rebecca's world collapsed even faster. The charitable board she served on urged her immediate resignation. The country club membership was withdrawn. Her so-called friends, the women she lunched and gossiped with, didn't recognize her as she. Passed them on the street. A competent crew emptied their penthouse, which I now possess free and clear. Their goods were put into storage, and the bill was forwarded to their now canceled credit cards. Her father, Martin Drake, the banking CEO, whose approval she so badly sought, did what men like him do. He cut his losses. He issued a public statement expressing his deep disappointment and shock, and announcing that he and his family would cut all links with his daughter and son-in-law to protect his reputation. He tossed them to the wolves. They were devastated, socially, professionally, and financially. About a week later, they demanded a meeting. They didn't have my real phone number, of course. The request was made through my lawyers. I agreed to visit them, not out of sympathy, but because there were still some loose ends to tie up. I did not meet them in the boardroom. I met them in the modest, abandoned apartment I'd lived in for 30 years, which they had attempted to take. It was now naked. I'd already moved my few items out. The only furniture was a modest wooden table and 3 chairs that I had carried in. They appeared broken. Nathan wore a cheap, off-the-rack suit that stretched loosely across his frame. Rebecca wore no makeup. Her hair was disheveled, and the luxury clothes were gone, replaced by plain trousers and a sweater. The fire had vanished from their eyes. They looked like ghosts. They sat opposite me, their gaze fixed on the table rather than on me. "What do you want, Ethan?" Nathan finally inquired, his voice a whisper. "Isn't it enough? You have destroyed us." I leaned forwards. "Destroyed you?" I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "No, Nathan, I have not ruined you. I simply took back what was mine. The money you built your life on was mine. The reputation you established was based on my sacrifice. I owned the exact ground you walked on. I did not destroy anything. I recently collected a debt you didn't even realize you had," Rebecca started crying silent, harsh tears. "What are we supposed to do?" She sobbed. "We've got nothing. Nothing." I gave a brief, bitter laugh. "You have your health. You have each other. That is more than Sarah had. That is more than I had at 13. You want to know what you should do? You are meant to acquire a job. A real one. You're supposed to experience what it's like to work for a living. Worry about rent and earn your own dignity rather than relying on someone else's." I slipped the folder across the table. "Here are the final papers. You will sign away your remaining assets, which are limited. In exchange, I agree not to pursue criminal charges for fraud or conspiracy." Nathan opened the folder, his hands shaking. He looked at the papers and then at me. "Then what?" "And then," I explained, "you're on your own. This concludes my involvement in your life. I've taken down the wall I put around you. Welcome to the real world." They sat down, dejected. They signed the paperwork. As they prepared to go, I said one final thing. "You know, I spent years cleaning toilets. I washed the floor, Rebecca. There is no shame in that work. It is honest. It is real. Maybe you'll figure it out." They went without saying anything else. I watched them stroll down the corridor of the building where I'd lived for so long. They did not look back. A few weeks later, I learned through the grapevine what had happened to them. Nathan, who had been banned in the financial industry, had accepted a position as a night shift stalker at a large retail chain. The irony was thick. What about Rebecca? Rebecca had taken a job as a kitchen helper at a tiny family-owned cafe on the outskirts of town. She was washing dishes, just as I had predicted. Not because I pushed her to, but because it was the only job she could find. Life had delivered its own punishment. My part in their tale was finished, but a new portion of my life was just beginning. I gathered my empire's immense resources and established a foundation. I named it the Invisible Providers. Its purpose was straightforward: to provide legal and financial assistance to abandoned family members and caregivers who had given everything and were left with nothing. It became my new mission, my way of honoring Sarah and ensuring that no one else ever felt the impotence I had in that hospital hallway. The foundation sparked a national movement, and I, Ethan Cole, the guy who had spent so long in the shadows, finally stepped into the light. A year has gone by. My life was revolutionized. I was no longer Ethan the janitor, but Mr. Cole, a philanthropist. The foundation became my sole focus. We assisted hundreds of people, including elderly parents who had been abandoned by their children, and siblings who had sacrificed their youth to raise younger siblings, only to be rejected. Each instance was a faint echo of my own story, and with each family we assisted, a small piece of my own wound started to heal. I never heard from Nathan or Rebecca. Oh, I did not seek them out. In my opinion, they were ghosts from another life. Then one Tuesday afternoon, my world shifted again. My foundation had a stringent system that I had personally developed. Every case file featuring the surname Cole would be highlighted for my personal examination. It was a precaution, ensuring that no distant, forgotten relatives slipped through the cracks. Most of them were false alarms, people with no connection to me. But this one was different. The file landed on my desk. The applicant remained anonymous. While applying for a grant through a hospital social work department, the money was intended for a highly specialized experimental pediatric surgery. The price was astonishing. The patient's name was Daniel Cole, age 5. The diagnosis caused the air to exit my lungs, a rare congenital cardiac condition. Sarah was born with exactly the same ailment. The physicians described it as a 1 in a million oddity. This couldn't be a coincidence. It needed to be. My heart pounded in my chest. I buzzed my head of security, Frank, a former investigator. Frank, I continued, my voice wavering, I am emailing you a file. I need you to learn all you can about this child. I need to find out who his parents are. Be discreet. 2 days later, Frank entered my office and gently closed the door. He didn't say anything. He simply placed a single image on my desk. It was a picture of a tiny boy with sandy brown hair and my father's eyes. He was smiling, but his complexion had a faint bluish tint, clear symptom of insufficient oxygen circulation that I recognized with a dreadful flash of remembrance. He sat on a park bench. Nathan and Rebecca stood behind him, hands on his shoulders. The room began to swirl. A son. They have a son, a 5-year-old boy. They had a child all along, but they kept him hidden from me. An ill child. I focused on the photograph on the small boy's face. The dates on the medical paperwork fell into place in my mind. The pricey experimental treatment he required had been paid 3 years prior by an unknown donor. I checked the paperwork for one of my own charitable trust, Sub-Blind Trust. One was for anonymous gifts to children's hospitals. My fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. I searched the recipient database, and there it was, a grant issued 3 years ago to cover the whole cost of an experimental cardiac operation for a patient called Daniel Cole. I'd saved him. I'd saved my own nephew's life. I never even knew he existed. The treachery was a bodily blow. It was deeper and more poisonous than the plan to have me committed. Hide a youngster from his own relatives, hiding a sick child from the one person on the planet who would have understood his suffering more than anybody else. Why? The rage was intense, but behind that was a deep, agonizing despair. This tiny boy, this innocent child, had been born into a family full of secrets and humiliation. I needed to see them. I asked Frank to find their address. They lived in a modest, run-down apartment complex in a town 2 hours outside of Chicago, far cry from the penthouse I had purchased for them. I drove there myself in my new, safe but unassuming automobile. I discovered their apartment. The paint was peeling from the door. I knocked. Nathan opened it. When he spotted me, he appeared to have been hit by lightning. He had aged 10 years. And then 1. He looked leaner, and the arrogance had vanished, leaving only a deep, tired exhaustion. Ethan, he sighed. We need to talk. Nathan, I said in a bland voice. I stepped inside. The apartment was small and minimally furnished with inexpensive used goods. Rebecca was in the small kitchen and froze when she spotted me, holding a dish towel. The little boy in the photo then appeared from a rear room. Mommy, he said, gazing at me with big, inquiring eyes. Who is that? Rebecca ran over and gently brought him back to his room. I'm just a visitor, sweetheart. Go play with your trains." When she returned, her face was a tangle of dread and guilt. The three of us stood together in the tight living room. "Why?" The word came out of me like a shot. "Why did you hide him from me?" Nathan could not look at me. He stared at the floor. Rebecca eventually spoke, and her voice was almost a whisper. "We were ashamed," she admitted. "Ashamed," I said, my voice rising. "Ashamed of what?" "Of having a child." "Ashamed of having a sick child," she clarified, tears welling up in her eyes. When he was diagnosed, I could only think about Sarah. Nathan could only talk about how it was happening again. "We were afraid. We felt ashamed to come to you. You had given up everything for a sick child. We felt like failures. We were worried you'd detest us. We were worried you would consider us as a burden, so we kept it a secret. We were planning to tell you someday." Nathan eventually looked up at me, his eyes begging. "Ethan, it was my fault. I was cowardly. After everything you've done, I couldn't face another failure. I couldn't face the sight in your eyes when you said, 'I told you so.' So I hid. I withheld my own son from you. It was the most terrible thing I had ever done." He eventually broke. The wall of pride and denial he had built his entire life had now crumbled. He sank into a chair and buried his face in his hands, sobbing uncontrollably. It was not a man's self-pitying wail after losing his money. 'Twas the sound of a man realizing the full extent of his own moral bankruptcy. I gazed at him, and for the first time, the wrath subsided to be replaced by something else. It was not forgiveness, not yet. It was a glimmer of comprehension. He had not acted maliciously, but out of deep, twisted shame. He had committed the ultimate betrayal out of fear of being perceived as weak or failing in my eyes. I remembered the little boy playing with his trains in the next room, my nephew. He was all that mattered right now. The circle of anguish and pain began with Sarah's death and had to end here, with him. I stared at my distraught brother and his weeping wife. "The surgery," I replied gently. "Was it successful?" Rebecca nodded and wiped her eyes. "Yes, the physicians declared it a miracle. An anonymous donor covered the entire cost. We never knew who it was." I let the silence linger in the air for a long time. Then I said, "Grab your coats, the three of you. You don't live here anymore." 5 years later, the screen displays Ethan, who is now in his early 60s. He seemed calm. The fatigue is gone. It was not a magic wand. There was no single tearful reunion that resolved everything. Healing is a slow and dirty process. It is work. I relocated them out of that gloomy apartment and into a modest but clean townhouse closer to the city and the best facilities for Daniel's follow-up treatment. I paid for therapy for all of us. Years of hatred and fury have to be dealt with. I didn't simply give Nathan a job, a tea. I gave him the opportunity. I informed him that if he wanted to work for me, he needed to start at the very bottom. He accepted a position in the mailroom of one of my lesser enterprises. He worked his way up gradually. Over 5 years, he wasn't the pompous vice president anymore. He was quiet, hardworking, and humble. He won his coworkers' esteem by hard effort rather than a flashy title. Last month, he was appointed regional manager. He deserved it. Rebecca discovered her own path. While washing dishes in that small diner kitchen, she discovered something new, a passion. She began as a prep cook and later became a line cook. She attended culinary school at night. She had genuine, natural talent. She is now the acclaimed executive chef at the Summit. She did not acquire the job through me. She earned it because she was the greatest. Her dignity is her own, forged through fire and steam. And Daniel, my nephew, he's 10 now. He is healthy, energetic, and full of life. He serves as the bridge. He is the reason we all learned to put down our weapons. We chose to rebuild something new from the rubble for him. This takes me to today. I'm standing at Sarah's grave. The sun is warm against my face, but I am not alone. Daniel is here with me. He's setting a little bouquet of wildflowers, which he gathered himself on the stone. "Is this Aunt Sarah?" he inquired, his voice full of a child's natural curiosity. "Yes," I responded, my voice full of enthusiasm. "This is her." He looks up at me. "My mom claims you saved my life as if you wish to preserve hers." I kneel alongside him, placing my hand on his shoulder. "I think in a way she saved all of us," I told him. I stare up at the green expanse of the cemetery. I see a car parked on the street. Nathan is resting against it and watching us from a distance. He does not intrude. He realizes that this is a precious space to me. Our connection is not what it once was. The innocence is lost forever. However, it has become a reality. It is based on a painful truth and a common hope for the future, represented by the small kid standing next to me. I see Nathan's gaze from across the field. I give him a slight, nearly unnoticeable nod. A nod of acknowledgement. A nod that indicates we're okay. He nods back. It turns out that the greatest riches isn't the money in the bank or the businesses you own. It is understanding who actually values you, even when you look to have nothing. It is about creating a legacy of love from a history of pain. It is about the calm hope for a new beginning. Thank you for hearing my story. I hope it moved you in some way. Have you ever been absolutely underestimated? Please share your tale in the comment section below. I honestly want to hear it.